How Qasim's faith in the Qur'an lit a forgotten world. Not everyone who lives in the shadows is a sinner. Sometimes, there are souls who choose the light, but fate forces them to walk through the deepest tunnels of destiny. At the edge of a dusty red village, where summer winds carry the heavy scent of earth, lived a man named Mohammed Fazal Bakshir. No one called him by name with warmth, not because they hated him, but because no one really knew him well enough to do so. Fazal had no father, no mother, no siblings, no one by his side. He lived like a shadow within the mosque's courtyard, a gatekeeper of others' faith, but never once asked, "And what about your own faith?" Each morning, before the sun reached the mosque's dome, Fazal would scrub the stone floor with bare hands, gathering fallen leaves beneath the pillars. The villagers grew accustomed to the sight, a poor man in worn clothes, yet somehow cleaner than even the richest men in town. Fazal never asked for anything. And no one ever promised him anything. One day, as the scent of incense still lingered on the stone steps, the old imam called out to him. His voice held both tenderness and something that cut like a blade. "Fazal, have you ever thought about getting married?" Fazal looked up, bewildered, like waking from a long dream where the word wife was as distant as gold in fairy tales. He gave a soft laugh. "Who would marry someone like me, master? I'm not asking who would. I'm asking, do you want to?" The imam's eyes locked with his, calm and unwavering. Fazal hesitated. His smile faded. In that moment, his heart beat as if the question wasn't real. I do." The imam nodded. "Good. I have a distant niece, she's quiet, devout. I'll take care of everything. All you need is to find a small home. Don't worry about the money. Leave the rest to me." The next day, Fazal stepped out of the mosque with a strange feeling. For the first time in years, he dreamt of something called a home, not just a shelter, but a place where someone would be waiting for him to return. He rented a tiny room beside the market, bare walls, cracked paint, but early sunlight streamed through the shutter slats. For Fazal, that was enough. But then, the night before the wedding, while the village slept, Fazal sat quietly in a shrine corner, staring at an old Qur'an resting on a wooden stand. His hands trembled not from cold, but from something deeper. "I have nothing. No money, no dowry. Only this heart. Is that enough, to keep someone?" he asked in silence. No reply came. Only the wind hissing through the cracks in the walls, as if even the sky was unsure. At dawn, the imam sent word across the village. "Anyone with spare clothes, extra coins, unused utensils, bring them to the mosque." No one refused. By late morning, a pile had formed. Worn sandals but still wearable, dented pots but spotless, simple shirts still holding the scent of sunlight, everything was gathered and sent to the tiny room where Fazal would bring his wife. The wedding took place at noon. No party, no music, no lights, no flowers, only a few witnesses, a white cloth, and silent vows that echoed louder than any celebration. Fazal's bride, a gentle woman with a plain face but eyes filled with peace, entered his life like a cool breeze. She asked nothing about the future, blamed nothing about the present, grieved nothing from the past. She simply smiled and offered her prayers, as if that alone was enough to begin a new chapter. That night, Fazal sat on the roof. The room was still. His young bride hummed softly in the kitchen, washing dishes. Fazal looked up at the sky. Clouds drifted slowly. The moon had not risen. Inside him stirred something strange and unfamiliar. Not fear of poverty. Not fear of hardship. But fear, that this happiness wouldn't last. The next morning, as the sun rose above the crooked tiles, Fazal was already awake. Like always, he walked toward the mosque, broom in one hand, rag in the other, his every movement part of his breath. But this time, he wasn't alone. From the small back window, his new wife stood silently, her hands resting on the frame. In her eyes was something Fazal had never seen: unshaken faith. She didn't call him husband with sugar-sweet words like in fairy tales. She simply brewed a pot of tea, wrapped a piece of dry bread in cloth, and placed it in the torn bag he always carried to work. Fazal turned back and caught her gaze. He gave a small nod. She nodded back. That was all. But that nod was the kind of beginning no words could describe. Time passed slowly. Life after the wedding didn't change much. Fazal worked odd jobs, hauling sacks in the market, sweeping floors at the school, picking scraps at the dump for coins. His wife never complained. Even when the roof leaked, even when their meal was just rice and sesame salt, she smiled. Smiled as though this simplicity was a happiness she had long been searching for. But those smiles couldn't hide all the worry in her heart. Each night, after Fazal had fallen asleep, she would sit up, lay down a prayer cloth, and whisper, "O Lord, I ask for no riches, no jewels. I only ask you to show mercy and give my husband an honest path to earn his keep, so that one day, he may walk through this world with his head held high." One day, after a long shift carrying bricks, Fazal overheard someone speaking of an Allahwala, a living saint who lived at the base of the northern mountains, known for helping the desperate. They said, if you arrived with sincerity, your prayers would be heard. Fazal said nothing to his wife. He simply wrapped his old scarf and set out. It was a secluded place. When he arrived, hundreds were lined up at the gates. Children in rags leaned on their mothers. Men with curved backs. Pregnant women clutching their bellies, each carried pain, just like him. But what struck Fazal wasn't the crowd, it was the kitchen out back. The smell of food filled the air. Hot meals were passed out endlessly. And those serving the food were the poor themselves, serving the poor. Suddenly, an old man in a brown robe locked eyes with him. "You want to work?" he asked, no introductions needed. Fazal nodded. No hesitation. From that day forward, Fazal's job was to hand out meals to the poor. He stood from morning till dusk, hands never idle. The children loved him not just for the food, but because each plate came with a whispered blessing, as if he was passing along a bit of hope. At day's end, he was allowed to take leftovers home. He split them, half for his wife, half for the homeless who slept near the night market. His wife never asked how much he earned. She only said, "As long as you come home, I need nothing else." A year passed. On a hot summer afternoon, as dry jasmine scents floated in from the village fields, Fazal came home wearing an odd smile. His wife noticed. Women always know. And just as she sensed 1 month later, she was pregnant. On the day their first daughter was born, the skies broke into heavy rain. Fazal sat by the window, cradling the newborn in his arms. Thunder cracked outside. But inside his heart, there was only peace. He looked at the baby, then at his wife, her hair soaked in sweat, but her mouth still smiling. He said nothing. He simply bowed his head, pressing his forehead to the baby's tiny hands, as if whispering, "Hello, my child. I have nothing to give you except this love." Life was still poor. But it wasn't cold anymore. Because now, the little house no longer echoed with just the wind. It held a baby's cry, a mother's lullaby, a father's footsteps and something sacred, like faith blooming from stone. If you're still watching this video and want to celebrate the arrival of Fazal's newborn daughter, please comment the number 8 below to let me know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend doing so and hitting the bell so you never miss a story. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content to inspire and uplift. A year after their first daughter was born, the small room was no longer just a refuge for two but a true home. Children grow fast, and that little girl with skin as soft and brown as almond milk and eyes that shone like the moon became the tiny flame that warmed every weariness of the day. Fazal was busier than ever, but each time he returned home, he would press his sun-darkened hands against his daughter's cheeks and whisper something no one else could hear. Sometimes, he didn't even have a coin to spare, yet when he looked at his wife and sleeping daughter, he felt as if he owned the whole world. Then one day, his wife turned to him and whispered, "Next time, I hope we have a boy." Fazal paused. He looked at her, his eyes as still as the bottom of a deep well. "You're not happy with our daughter?" "It's not that," she quickly replied. "It's just, I think, having a big brother to protect his sisters would be a good thing, wouldn't it?" Fazal didn't smile. He just nodded slightly and turned away. But inside, something twisted, not because of her wish, but because he had begun to fear hope itself. When something beautiful happens to those who've long suffered, they often fear it may never return. But fate, in one of its cruel jokes, gave them another daughter the next time. And another. And another. Each time, his wife bit her lip and smiled. But in her eyes, something slowly began to crack. No one said a word, yet with every breath, sorrow slipped in like smoke between fingers. One night, after putting their 4 daughters to sleep, she turned to Fazal with tears falling silently. Why is it never a son? Do you think I've done something wrong?" Fazal froze. He grabbed her hands, shaking his head urgently. "Don't ever say that. Our children are all gifts. Boy or girl, they are born of love." But deep inside, even within him, something quietly broke. Not from disappointment, but from helplessness. His wife began to pray even more. She would wake in the middle of the night, her trembling fingers running over prayer beads, her pillow damp with tears. She never blamed God, but every plea seemed to vanish into silence, like the heavens were turning their face away. Then, the 5th daughter was born. That day, there was no rain. No sun either. Just a dull, gray light falling quietly over the village and over the heart of the mother holding her newborn, crying without sound. She leaned into her husband's shoulder and whispered, "Oh Lord, if you truly love me, please, just once, let me see my son born into this world." Fazal held her shoulders tightly, as if letting go would cause her to vanish into smoke. But God remained silent. The next year, their 6th daughter was born. Then the 7th. By then, neither of them could even force a smile anymore. Not from dislike, but because exhaustion had risen to their throats. His wife sat quietly on a fraying mat, her gaze distant, hair tangled like winter reeds. 7 daughters, like 7 fallen stars, chattered and danced around their poor home, but none of them understood why their mother no longer smiled. Fazal, the man who once had nothing but faith, was now beginning to doubt that very faith. That night, as their children slept, his wife asked softly, "Do you still believe in miracles?" He didn't answer right away. Only after a long silence did he say, "I don't know anymore. But I'll keep trying, because if we stop believing, we'll have nothing left." The next morning, Fazal didn't go to distribute food like he usually did. He put on his oldest clothes and walked straight out of the village, toward the place once called the seat of the Allah Wala, the place where he had once found a job. This time, he wasn't looking for work. He came seeking a promise. He waited all morning. When the crowd had thinned, the same old man in the brown robe finally emerged. Fazal looked up, straight into his eyes. "You once said that those who live with kindness would be rewarded. Then why, after 7 daughters, have I still not seen my son?" The man didn't grow angry. He simply looked at Fazal, his eyes calm like a lake after a storm. "Some prayers go unanswered, not because you are wrong, but because you haven't gone deep enough. If you wish to receive, start by preserving what has been forgotten." Fazal was stunned. "I want you to collect the torn pages of the Qur'an that have been discarded. Gather every scrap, every word, every line, and bury them in the earth with your own hands. Do this for 1 year. No payment. No thanks. But if you finish, you will receive what you seek." Fazal didn't understand why. But he nodded. Not because he was certain, but because there was nothing else left to believe in. When the old man told Fazal to collect discarded pages of the Qur'an, to bury them with bare hands and expect nothing in return but faith, Fazal didn't ask why. He didn't argue, didn't bargain. He simply turned and walked away, as if he had been given a command his heart had been waiting for these past 10 years. That night, he returned home under a high moon. The small room had long gone dark. 7 daughters lay curled together like baby birds in a nest. His wife was still awake. She didn't ask where he'd gone. She quietly spread a prayer mat on the floor, brought him a bowl of warm water, and looked at her husband with eyes that understood 1,000 unspoken words. "This time, I won't ask anything. I just pray you have the strength to come back." Fazal took her hand. His hands were calloused and rough, but inside, he felt still. "I will come back. But I may not be the same man you knew." 2 days later, Fazal left the village. No one knew where he went. They only saw a man with tired eyes, carrying a sack, a shovel, and a hoe, disappear past the marketplace and into the sun-scorched fields. He found a patch of wild land overgrown and abandoned. People said the place was haunted. But to him, ghosts were not as frightening as being forgotten. There, he dug a hole. Not deep, but deep enough to bury the things the world had thrown away: torn scripture, stained pages, sacred verses trampled in silence. From that day forward, every single day, Fazal carried his old sack and knocked on doors. "Does anyone here have old scripture, torn books, worn Qur'an pages? Please, let me return them to the place they belong." Some gave. Some slammed the door. Some called him mad. Others shook their heads with pity. Fazal never explained. He simply bowed, thanked them, and moved on. Eventually, he became known as the man who collected forgotten words. Children called him Old Paper Man. Adults muttered, "These days, keeping faith is harder than keeping a whole dollar bill." In the first month, Fazal collected barely a sackful. But by the second month, the volume grew. Not just torn paper. Sometimes, he found entire Qur'ans tossed in the rain, nibbled by ants, buried under piles of garbage. He picked up everything, cleaned it, prayed, and buried it. Each evening, when darkness fully settled, Fazal would return to the wild hill, kneel beside the burial pit, gently turn each page, wash them in stream water, smooth them with his fingers, and lay them to rest like saying goodbye to old friends. By the 4th month, people began to look at him differently. Some brought pages to him willingly, without being asked. Others helped him wrap them in clean cloth. A few even asked him to bury pages that once belonged to their deceased parents. No one explained why. But maybe, deep inside, every person has a quiet place that feels shame for once forgetting the sacred. Then came the rainy season. The skies poured endlessly. The burial mound soaked through. Each time Fazal dug, the mud rose to his ankles, but he never stopped. His body grew thinner, his hands cracked, and at night he sometimes burned with fever from the cold, but he never told anyone. Only his wife, quieter than ever, would sit each evening patching his torn sack, folding dry towels, and boiling ginger water for him to drink when he returned. "How many pages have you buried?" she asked one night while massaging his shoulders. Fazal didn't count. He only said, "Enough to feel like I still matter." Then, the fated day arrived, quiet, like any other. Fazal returned home after a long day. The rain had just stopped. His wife greeted him, holding a piece of white cloth. I have news." His heart tightened. I'm pregnant." Fazal stared at her, his eyes red not from surprise, but because, for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't afraid. For the next 9 months, he didn't leave the village. He continued his mission, burying sacred pages, knocking on doors. But this time, each page he laid into the soil, he whispered, "If this is a prayer, then please guide my child." On a spring night, when white magnolias bloomed along the dusty path, the baby was born. A son. A baby boy. Fair skin. Black hair. Eyes that mirrored the crescent moon the night Fazal first married. His wife looked at him, cradling the baby, her lips trembling with a tearful smile. Fazal couldn't speak. He sank to his knees beside the bed, laid his head in her lap, and wept. Wept like a child. Wept as if he had never known what tears truly meant. If you're still watching this video and wish to celebrate the arrival of Fazal's newest little angel, please comment the number 9 below to let me know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend doing so and hitting the bell so you never miss a story. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content to inform and inspire you. The child was born on a windless night. No thunder. No lightning. Not even the sound of rain. Only the gentle scent of white magnolia drifting in from the yard, as if the heavens themselves were bowing in welcome to something sacred taking root. Fazal didn't believe in good omens. He had been deceived by fate too many times to keep dreaming. But when his rough hands held his newborn son for the first time, rosy cheeks, black hair, tiny fists clenched like a naive promise, he knew this miracle was real. His wife named him Qasim, which means the one who shares, because, as she said, this child came as a reward for the patience his father gave to the world. Fazal didn't respond. He simply stepped out onto the porch, lifted his gaze to the March sky, where a single star was falling, slowly. And for the first time in 10 years, his heart was not surrounded by fear. The next morning, instead of knocking on doors asking for old Quranic pages, Fazal did something he had never done before. He gathered all the savings the family had, money meant for new clothes for baby Qasim, and walked to the Islamic bookstore at the end of the village. "I want to buy Qur'ans. As many as I can." The shopkeeper stared at him as though he had lost his mind. "What are you planning to do with all these?" Fazal smiled. "I want to give one to every household, one book for each home." If the world once discarded it, then now I want to return it to where it belongs. 3 days later, the entire village was abuzz. A thin man in a faded gray robe, carrying a newborn son, went door to door, offering each family a Qur'an wrapped carefully in pristine white cloth, with a tiny jasmine flower tucked in the fold. He didn't say much. He simply bowed and said, "If someone once forgot, this is the time to remember." At first, people were surprised, then touched, and then ashamed. Many accepted the books with tears in their eyes, remembering how, at some point, they had cast aside the sacred in pursuit of life's exhausting practicality. The elderly dusted off their altars and rearranged their bookshelves. The children sat quietly, listening to their mothers read aloud. As for Fazal, he never asked for thanks. To him, each book received was a spark of light. A small spark, yes, but one that, when lit at the right moment, could burn away indifference. Time passed. Little Qasim grew up surrounded by the laughter of 7 sisters. His earliest days were filled with tenderness, gentleness, and the whispered teachings Fazal shared each night as he rocked him to sleep. You are not the only miracle. You are the result of the miracles your father once gave away. The child didn't understand, but he slept peacefully. When Qasim turned 4, Fazal did something new. He built a wooden bookshelf beneath the largest mango tree in the village. On it, he placed restored Qur'ans, along with a small sign that read, "If you've ever lost a piece of yourself, come here. Perhaps, you'll find it again." At first, no one came. Then one day, a poor child, tattered, dusty, climbed onto the bench, took a book, sat beneath the tree's shade, and began to read. After that, more children came each afternoon. Adults followed. Some came to take books. Others came to leave them. Some brought torn pages and asked, "Uncle Fazal, do these need to be buried?" Fazal said nothing. He simply bowed and gently received the paper as if lifting a fallen petal. The village began to change. But the greatest change wasn't in the number of books on the shelf. It was in the way people looked at Fazal. They no longer saw him as the poor man who keeps torn scripture. They began calling him the keeper of memory. And soon, people came to him not only for books. They came for guidance, for silence, for the kind of glance that says, "We once forgot, but now, we're remembering." Time slipped through their hands like sand. It felt like just yesterday Qasim was a newborn in his father's arms. And now, he was 17. Tall, strong, eyes dark and deep, as if they gathered every pure thing from his father's heart. He never had fancy toys. No expensive bicycle. Didn't go to big city schools. But Qasim had something few others in the village ever did. A foundation built on love and faith. By the age of 7, he had memorized the entire Qur'an. At 10, he could recite and teach verses to children in the village without even looking at a page. At 12, he taught how to wash, how to kneel, how to breathe just as his father once taught him. By 15, Qasim began to dream bigger. He didn't just want to preserve old scriptures. He wanted to replant entire forests of faith in lands where belief had been forgotten. One day, he told Fazal, "Father, I want to go abroad. I want to do something bigger for the Qur'an. For those who've never even heard of it." Fazal went still. Not out of fear that his son might leave, but because he knew that light, once it leaves the warmth of home, will face fierce winds. "Where will you go?" Fazal asked, voice trembling. Italy, Qasim replied firmly. There's a small Muslim community living and working there. They need someone to teach the Qur'an to their children. I want to go. Fazal didn't try to stop him. He had spent his whole life learning that love does not chain, it blesses. Then let's go. That night, he sat with Qasim on the porch. The stars blinked overhead, and the faint smell of jasmine lingered in the air, as it had on the night Qasim was born. Son, Fazal said softly, the world out there is wide. It will not always be gentle. But if you carry the Qur'an in your heart, and kindness in your hands, no storm can truly shake you. Qasim listened quietly, then reached for his father's hand, rough, scarred, and strong. He kissed it and whispered, everything I am, is because of what you carried. A month later, Fazal stood at the village edge. Qasim wore a simple white shirt and held an old cloth bag. Inside were three things: a worn Qur'an, a bundle of letters from his sisters, and a small packet of dates his mother had wrapped with trembling hands. Fazal didn't cry. Not until the bus turned the corner and disappeared behind the dusty hill. Then, he stood alone under the sky, and for the first time in years, lifted both hands high and prayed not for himself, but for a future he would never see. Letters came. At first, once a month. Then every 2 weeks. Qasim wrote of children who had never touched a Qur'an now memorizing verses. Of elderly men who had forgotten how to pray, now crying as they bowed. He spoke of harsh winters, language barriers, racism, and yet, joy. Joy that only comes when one feels useful. Joy that grows not from ease, but from meaning. And with every letter, Fazal would read aloud under the mango tree, to the village children, to the neighbors, to the wind. Years passed. Fazal aged. His steps slowed. His voice rasped. But his eyes, they never lost that gleam. The bookshelf beneath the tree remained full, pages added, never burned. Children came and went, generations passed beneath its shade. Qasim visited when he could. And each time, he knelt beside the patch of land where his father still buried old scripture. He didn't say much. He just helped dig. Washed the pages. Smoothed them gently. Like his father once did. And then one spring, Fazal did not rise with the call to prayer. The village knew. The tree seemed to know. Even the wind stood still. They buried him just beyond the mango tree. Qasim placed his father's tools beside the grave, the old sack, the wooden ladle, a Qur'an wrapped in jasmine cloth. No tears were shed in noise. Only silence. Reverence. Memory. Because some men do not leave behind gold or land. They leave behind faith. And flame. If you've made it this far and want to honor the life of Fazal and the legacy he passed to Qasim, comment the number 10 below to let us know you're here. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you won't miss our next story. Your support helps us keep creating heartfelt content to inspire, inform, and remember. Then one night, in a quiet October rain, Qasim was sitting curled up on a wet sidewalk, the Qur'an resting on his knees, when a cold hand landed on his shoulder. He looked up. It was the factory owner. The man no longer looked fierce. His raincoat soaked through, eyes bloodshot, shoulders slumped with something unbearably heavy. "You still reading that thing?" Qasim didn't reply. The man sat down beside him, right there on the wet pavement, leaning against a street lamp. After a while, he pulled a photo from his coat pocket, a picture of a boy. Curly hair. Blue eyes. A face full of hope. "My son," he whispered. Died 3 years ago. Truck accident. He was holding a book when it happened. Not a holy book. Nothing special. Just a storybook. I've hated anyone who loves books since that day. Qasim turned to look at the man, not the angry boss, but a father who had lost everything. You don't hate books, Qasim said softly. You hate feeling powerless. Like my father once hated the sky for not raining. But then, he carried the water home himself. The man sat in silence for a long time. Then he said, I'm not here to apologize. But if you still want to read, tomorrow night, I've got an old warehouse. No one uses it. If you want. Qasim bowed his head. Not in thanks. But in a silent prayer sent up to a sky that had held nothing but gray clouds for so long. The next evening, Qasim returned with 10 children by his side. The warehouse was dark, dusty, and smelled of mold. But to him, it was a sanctuary. He laid down a cloth, opened his worn Qur'an, and began to read. His voice was low, flowing like a river in the night. Outside, the rain poured down. But inside, for the first time in months, the fire had returned. From that first night in the old warehouse, Qasim's Qur'an readings continued quietly, like a slow rain soaking into soil. Not loud. Not dramatic. But seeping into every corner of a community long forgotten. That warehouse had once stored scrap metal, broken machines, and rotting wood. But under the hands of the poor, it slowly became a shelter for memory and hope. They spread old rugs. Hung a single dim bulb. Each night, after their shifts, small groups gathered. No one called them. No one wore religious clothes. No one brought books. They brought only tired hearts. Qasim sat in the middle, reading slowly. His voice no longer echoed like it had on that first night. Now it was warm, grounded, and carried a calm that only comes after surviving many storms. Do you remember, a boy once asked, when I was little, I got beaten by my father for tearing a Qur'an page. And now, here I am learning those same words with you. Qasim didn't answer. He just smiled gently. Because he knew. Forgiveness isn't a gift we give. It's a journey back to where we belong. The factory owner, the same man who once fired Qasim, slapped him, and mocked everything he believed in, now stood outside the warehouse every night. He didn't come in. He didn't leave. Some nights, he arrived early to replace a broken bulb himself. Other nights, he brought a box of cold bread. No one spoke of the past. Because everyone understood. Some apologies don't need to be spoken. But light, no matter how small, always attracts eyes that want to extinguish it. One late winter night, as Qasim was cleaning up, a breathless child ran in. Brother. Someone painted the front door. They wrote awful things. Qasim rushed outside. On the warehouse door, in messy red spray paint, someone had written, "Terrorists hiding behind holiness. Go back to where you came from." At the base of the wall were torn Quranic pages, trampled in the mud. The children stood silently. Some cried. Some trembled. Qasim said nothing. He crouched down and began picking up each piece, his hands shaking, but his eyes brighter than ever. People thought that night would break him. But it didn't. The next morning, he arrived earlier than usual, carrying a bag of paint and sheets of clean white cloth. He repainted the wall, scrubbed away the mud, and posted a new sign on the door. "If you think we don't belong here, stay one night, and listen to us read." Beneath it, in Qasim's own handwriting. "This is not a mosque. This is a home for those whose voices were once stolen." A week later, something unexpected happened. A tall foreign man walked into the warehouse one rainy night. His face was cold, his gaze sharp, his voice like steel. "I don't believe in what you believe." Qasim nodded. "I don't ask you to." The man looked around, then slowly said, "But I want to listen." That night, he sat in the last row. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just listened. Listened with all the broken places in his heart he'd never dared to touch. And when the reading ended, he quietly left, placing a small note on the table. "I haven't cried in 12 years. Tonight, I cried, for something I never understood before." The warehouse began to overflow. Too many people came. Some were willing to stand outside in the rain, just to hear Qasim's voice from within. Those who once mocked or rejected him now came asking for a seat. Some landlords even offered their unused storage spaces free of charge. "We just want that light to reach our home, too." But, just as the flame began to spread, the shadows started to gather. There were people who didn't like what was happening. Whispers surfaced. Illegal assembly. Spreading superstition. Inciting minority unrest. Then, on an early spring evening while Qasim was reading in the newly restored warehouse, a group of people stormed in. No warning. No sirens. They were city police. Accompanied by a few unfamiliar faces whose eyes carried an open contempt that needed no hiding. "Who is Qasim?" He stood up, hands still gently resting on the Qur'an. "I am. You are being detained for organizing unauthorized gatherings and disturbing public order." The children cried. The adults surged forward, ready to protest. But Qasim raised his hand. "No one resist. No one shout. We chose light, let's not behave like the dark." And then, he was taken away. The overhead bulb flickered. The Qur'an slipped from his hands, landing open on an unfinished page. Rain began to fall. On the street, no one spoke a word. But inside their hearts, something cracked, like the first fissure in a block of ancient ice. The iron door slammed shut behind Qasim with a cold metallic clang. Like thunder breaking upon a colorless world. The cell was freezing. No windows. No bed. Just a concrete chamber with a low ceiling and a dim yellow light pooling over a stagnant puddle on the floor. They pushed Qasim in. No one beat him. But the silence, sharp and deliberate, cut deeper than any whip. The guards never looked him in the eyes. They treated him like dust meant to be brushed away, forgotten. That first night, Qasim didn't sleep. Not from fear. But from cold. Cold that seeped through the concrete into his spine. Cold that crawled from silence into his heart. He didn't cry. But for the first time in his life, he thought of his father. Not the man who once lifted him onto his shoulders. But the one who once knelt beside torn scripture. Dug through hardened earth. And stitched the broken memory of a forgotten community. "Father," Qasim whispered into the darkness. "If I never walk out of here again, will you be sad?" No answer came. Only a single drop of water fell from the rusted pipe above, landing warm in his palm. 3 days later, he was summoned for interrogation. A white room cold as steel. The man across the table wasn't a policeman. He wore a turtleneck, a gold ring on his finger, and a smile that never touched his eyes. "Qasim, what are you trying to do?" "Nothing," Qasim replied. "I was only reading." and gathering people. No one was forced. You believe you're doing the right thing. Qasim looked up. His eyes held no sunshine anymore. Only a small flame, quiet but unextinguished. I don't believe. I know. The man was silent for a moment. Then suddenly laughed. Good. Very good. You're the kind of person who can light a candle in a storm. But you should know fire burns quickly. Qasim said nothing. He just lowered his head and whispered a verse not to defy, but to remember who he was. They locked him away for a full week, no sunlight. Rations were cut. No contact allowed. No books. No human voice. Only footsteps outside the door, and the sound of keys turning. Like a whispered reminder, you are nothing now. Qasim began to murmur to himself each night, reciting Qur'an from memory, like a blind man retracing the road in the dark. Sometimes, his voice faltered. Not from hunger, but from a creeping doubt. Does light truly need space to survive? Or is it just an illusion, beautiful, but useless? On the 11th day, a guard handed him a piece of paper. Not a confession form. A handwritten letter. The script was shaky, but familiar, like the wind from an old season. My son, I can't write much, but your mother says she dreams of you every night sitting by a stream, reading. I don't think she's dreaming. I believe light can pass through stone. If you still carry a single verse in your heart, then don't worry. God is still there. He just wants you to learn how to speak in silence. Father. Qasim collapsed over the table. For the first time, his tears fell. Not from fear, but relief. Yes. Father. I still remember. I still read. I'm still here. From that day on, Qasim changed. He didn't ask for a reduced sentence. Didn't ask for release. Didn't shout. Didn't protest. He simply started cleaning the cell. Picked up scraps of torn paper thrown by other prisoners. Folded dirty rags neatly. When allowed into the sun, he wrote verses in the sand and erased them with his own hand. One day, an old guard said to him, "You're the strangest prisoner I've ever seen." Qasim smiled. "I'm not in prison. I'm just learning, in a classroom without a chalkboard." One stormy night, Qasim was summoned to meet a stranger. She was a young woman, brown hair, petite frame, trembling under a thin coat. "Do you remember me?" she asked. Qasim blinked, puzzled. "I'm the daughter of the man who once tore your Qur'an, the factory owner." He froze. "My father passed away last month. Brain cancer. But before he died, he wrote a note in his will asking me to find you." She handed Qasim an old photo. He was in it, smiling, surrounded by children in that very first reading room. On the back, scribbled in his handwriting, "He's the reason I didn't die empty." The girl cried. "My father said sorry for being too late." Qasim bowed his head. He didn't say anything. He just placed his palms together and silently recited the verse his father once taught him. 15 days after that fateful meeting, Qasim was released. No applause. No one waiting at the gates. Just a pale summer morning, with soft wind and the smell of earth after a night rain. The old prison guard handed him a small wrapped bundle. "I kept this for you. Some mother sent it months ago." Qasim opened it. It was his father's old Qur'an, frayed at the edges. Underneath it, folded paper with faint, fragile writing. If you're still alive, bring that light back home. If not, I'll read for you, every night. Qasim's hands trembled. Not from weakness, but because his heart had started beating again after so long in silence. Qasim never returned to the old warehouse. He no longer lectured. No longer read aloud. Not because he lost faith, but because the light had already spread. The children now organized their own readings. The men who once ignored him now took turns opening their homes for gatherings. And the warehouse, once a refuge, was now known by a quiet name: the Echo Room. The place where voices once stolen were heard for the first time. Qasim returned home. The flight was 8 hours long. Night had fallen by the time he stepped out of the domestic terminal, his legs trembling, as if the earth itself recognized that one of her sons had come back. The red-tiled rooftops peeked from behind bamboo groves. The narrow dirt paths were just as he remembered. And then, the old house appeared, its walls chipped, the bougainvillea vines still glowing bright as ever. Fazal sat on the old wooden chair by the porch. He didn't look up when he heard footsteps. He simply asked, "Qasim?" "Yes," Qasim's voice cracked. Fazal didn't turn. He simply stretched out an arm behind him, inviting his son to sit beside him, no questions asked. After a while, he said, "I thought the light had returned days ago. But turns out, it was only today that it finally knocked on the door." Qasim broke down crying. He clutched his father's hands, now covered in calluses and time. "I'm sorry for being gone so long." Fazal shook his head. "No, my son. You didn't leave. You took the light I lit, and carried it farther than I ever dreamed." That night, the father and son sat together in silence. No sermons. No philosophy. Just two souls. One who once dug Quranic pages from garbage. And one who once had his Qur'an torn in a foreign land. Now sitting in peace, side by side. Qasim opened his father's old Qur'an. The first page was yellowed. He began to read. Fazal didn't close his eyes. He just looked at his son and smiled. As if all the years of hardship, humiliation, and quiet pain had melted away in the clarity of that single recitation. Pure as early monsoon rain. Outside the porch, the breeze was soft. A few village lamps still glowed. Faint voices of children reciting verses echoed from a house down the road. A lesson passed from father to son. Now burning bright in many homes. No one remembered who started it all. Only the light remained. Moving forward. Allah ki kudrat ka karishma was not a miracle that fell from the sky. It was a miracle born from the mud, from dirty hands, from silent tears, and from the quiet persistence of those who never stopped believing in what was right even when no one stood with them. And perhaps, that is the true power of God. Thank you for joining us today. We would love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share one thing this story taught you, and how you'll carry that into your life. Your words matter to us. Reading your reflections brings us strength and inspiration. If this video touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue crafting stories that uplift, inspire, and heal. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.